because I definitely felt this, that having that London reputation was exportable for me. It gave me resonance in other territories.
Yeah, and also there's the other thing, like if you work in the fashion industry, you know, there's a real need for you. I mean, this was very much my personal thing, but you know, I wanted my career to go in a certain way. I didn't particularly want to work for the high street, even though I've consulted on with the high street. I wanted to work with Dior, and I worked with Dior.
Right.
And I wanted to work with Louis Vuitton, and I worked with Louis Vuitton. Because if your career path in fashion is an absolute career path, which was how I wanted to do it, the only way I could push myself forward was to work with these big companies. You know, these big heritage brands, and it gave me a lot of confidence, and also it means that other people would look at me and would go, well, if she's been doing the sales at Dior, then we would like to work with her.
Yeah.
Or, you know, it gives you it really gives your CV a real push.
Right.
And there's I mean, I'm consulting with Iceberg at the moment, and their creative director is English. And there's a lot of that toing and froing. You know, Loewe worked with J.W. Anderson, and before that Stuart Vevers, and Kim Jones was at LV and is now at Dior. So there's definitely those big brands look to the UK for this amazing creativity that we have to offer.
Yeah.
And it you know, I mean, I can sit here with my Irish passport and basically go, I'm all right, Jack. But it is, you know, I feel it is a problem. And, you know, as you've said, it's quite difficult to quantify, but I sat in a sales room, a multi-brand sales room, just as Brexit was being announced. And the BFC had come in and had said, well, you know, we don't think it's going to happen and blah, blah, but if it does, don't worry, because, you know, the pound will probably get weaker and you'll make lots of sales. And we all sort of sat there going, okay. And the few days after, it was the most depressing time I'd ever spent in a sales room. The Japanese buyers weren't buying, the Chinese buyers weren't buying, they all saw everything as a complete destabilisation of the UK and the industry, and it just became very fearful, and our sales dropped. I mean, you know, it was an actual physical thing.
Okay. And have you seen any more balance within that in the last 2 years?
I think there's still a knock of confidence with people. I mean, it's a bit like with any, like a large brand. If you keep changing your creative director, there's no way that anybody understands what's going on. So if you're in the process of like talking about leaving or staying, or are we leaving, or are we doing this, or why would you then feel the confidence to buy that into that? And as a small brand as well, I mean, we, as Sibling, we were known for knitwear. So most of our yarns came from Italy. So, you know, those costs started going up. We worked with Italian factories. You know, those costs start going up. And then you look at UK manufacturing, and the factories that we were working with were starting to close. Belper closed. You know, the wonderful people in Scotland who we used to work with ended up having to be bought out. They were bought out by Chanel, but that also then meant that they wouldn't do small runs.
Right.
So there's over 2 years there's been a real shift in so many industries, weaving, knitwear, and in the UK I just feel like our industry is so, like, it's so precarious that anything like that, even if it's just an increase in import charges of yarn, you know, that then has a knock-on effect to the consumer, and the consumer is going to sit there and go, I know that has a UK label, and I know it has Italian yarns, but that sweater which was 150 quid at this time is now 350 quid, and the consumer then will just not buy it, and then that, you know, that goes. I don't want to sound like doom, but anyway, I'm being a bit doomy today.
So I think that's fine. I think people they're okay with you being doomy, but I just wonder, where do you see, because there's been a lot of talk about emerging markets and about the value of these markets as new opportunities in the global landscape, and you know, having worked for both a UK brand, but you know, consulting, and then now working with an Italian brand, do you see a difference in how they buy, how they consume?
Well, I mean, everyone talks about, you know, China, unless of course you're Dolce and Gabbana, and then you can't talk about China ever again.
Have a look at Diet Prada, just to get the lowdown on what's going on there. It's like it's TV.
It is TV. It's like watching a very slow car crash.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because, you know, again, like, you know, when this all the discussions first started, there was actually a talk. The BFC did a talk, and in fact, there's no one. Is there anyone here from the British Fashion Council? I find it quite strange that they don't like come and talk about it.
I do invite them.
You know, they were saying, oh, it will be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be this, it'll be that. And they do quite often then just go, but there's always China.
Yeah.
And yes, you know, there is always China, and there, you know, that is a growth market and everything else. And I get it, and they are looking to UK brands, you know, and there's a huge thing about counterfeiting in China, so they are looking to people who are perhaps smaller. But again, their consumer is price point driven.
You're right.
And it's like the Dover Street Markets of this world. I mean, I've sold for many years to Dover Street Market, but it is often like being in a museum. You know, they will buy a showpiece that's £1,000, but because they have their own product, they're not that bothered if it doesn't really sell. If it's got somebody in, and then they've sold 5 Comme des Garçons t-shirts, then everybody's happy. So I think we should be a little bit wary of this whole, you know, shining example of we can go and make our millions in China, because I've yet to see it actually happen, and that's with everyone from Dior to Burberry to, you know, all of those type of people. It's like, yes, there's a market there, but actually, is it realistically?
Right, and is it as loyal?
Yeah, is it as loyal? And also, you know, I sometimes you just feel like when you're actually in it and you're in the showrooms and you're doing sales appointments, that you do feel like you're being fed certain information that potentially is not really true. It might be true of the film industry in China, which is booming. It might be true of the car industry. But when it comes to fashion, I think sometimes we do get fed slightly PR'd information.
Yeah, we did an event because we're also, it sounds really Victorian, but we are the secretariat for the all-party parliamentary group for textiles and fashion, which Nancy came to and a few of the people here. And we did an event on fashion trade with China. And I didn't realise when I'd invited them, but I invited the European head of Alibaba, VIP and JD, and they basically started preening and saying, well, we're the best at this. It was really funny to watch them all. And it was quite interesting hearing the hype. There was a bit of hype going on.
Yeah, there's definitely hype around things. And I just think the main concern that I've always had, which is why I ended up wearing an in t-shirt at the end of my last fashion show, was that we weren't being given enough information. And I've been very vocal in asking for that information, asking the British Fashion Council to tell me exactly what's going on, how it could potentially affect my, you know, my business, or even my consultancies. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, we're talking about things here which are, you know, that I've thought about if I've ever got offered a job in America. There's that whole, can you get your visa?
Yeah.
Are you prepared to
The
put
cost
$5
implication.
grand up and we'll put the rest of it up to come and work for Alexander Wang, blah, blah, blah. So it feels like it's going to get to that stage.
Yeah.
I mean, it may not, because again, I don't know, because no one is actually sitting down and giving me that information. All I do know is that being in a multi-brand showroom just after this all hit was incredibly depressing.
Yeah, I would imagine.